There are a few key truths in life that so many of us wrestle and wrangle with, causing ourselves so much angst, anxiety, resentment, disappointment, and frustration in the process. And these can kind of be summed up by recognizing that nothing is perfect, nothing is really personal, and nothing is permanent. We sometimes have a tendency to assume that life should be fair and that it should be relatively pain free. And unfortunately, this is very rarely the case. I mean, people don't always behave the way that we would expect them to or like them to. Things change, everything comes to an end. I mean, you will be let down, you will experience hardship, you will experience curveballs, and that's just part and parcel of the living experience. And I suppose sometimes the best you can do is recognize that even when things don't turn out for the best, that you can still try to make the best of what you actually have. The more we resist our reality, the more we wrestle with the life that we have and the person that we are, the more likely we are to struggle, the more likely we are to feel embittered and angry and disappointed. An inability to accept the inevitable unfairness of life and some of the difficulties that we face leads to avoidance. It leads to us turning to anything that will make us feel a little bit better in the short term. It also leads to a need for control, and the more we try to control external circumstances, the more unhappy we are, because ultimately the only thing that we can actually work with is our internal experience. So when we are able to show up to our life situation with compassion, with loving kindness, and with an attempt to work with the egoic tendencies that we all have, we are more likely to come up with solutions. We are more likely to be able to pay attention to what is actually good about our lives, as opposed to tearing it apart and identifying all the things that aren't perfect, that aren't the way that we would have liked them to be. Now, these concepts are both spiritual and existentialist and can sound a little bit fatalistic and pessimistic. And yet, when you integrate them into your life, when you recognize that you're really entitled to nothing, and when you work on acceptance and compassion, things become so much easier. I mean, life can be very challenging and very hard and still wondrous. It can be mundane and simultaneously beautiful. And it's a choice. It's a choice that everyone has the option of making, and that's not deterring from anybody's pain or suffering. It's just recognizing that sometimes you just have to deal with the cards that you've been dealt, and rather than fighting against them, you need to step up to the plate and ask yourself, okay, what can I actually do here? How can I add significance to what it is that's currently going on? How can I find some meaning in this? And when you're in the depths of despair, that's not always easy, and I recognize that. I've been there, I continue to be there, and I assume I'll be there at some time in the future. However, when you put the effort into trying to implement a little bit of meaning and significance into what's going on, when you become more aware of the tiny snippets of awesomeness that you witness throughout your day, even if it's something very small in nature, or even if it's just the absolute joy of spending time with your kid, having a hug from them, hearing a really nice piece of music, seeing a beautiful sunrise or sunset, drinking a really nice cup of tea. I mean, these are all the moments that make up your life. These are all the enjoyable things, and we tend to bypass them. We're looking for the big grandiose moments as opposed to appreciating the little things that are your life. And again, assuming that conditions need to be perfect for your life to start is a road to dissatisfaction. It also leads to resentment. I mean, we have so many expectations of ourselves, of other people, and of our lives, and ultimately they are a shortcut to disillusionment and disappointment. We end up resenting people, we end up resenting ourselves. Nothing is ever good enough, and it's just recognizing that acceptance is not about passivity. It's not about plastering positivity onto your situation. It's about seeing it for what it is and doing your best to work with it. I think it was Ruth King that said that happiness is not a reward and sadness is not a punishment. And again, as I said, it can be very difficult when you're in the midst of something that you just don't want to accept, to implement these strategies, and it can feel very overwhelming. And sometimes it is just about being able to find one little thing that you can appreciate about your day, find one little piece of goodness, and sometimes that can be really hard to find, particularly when you're struggling with your mental health or when you're struggling with very adverse circumstances. But it's having compassion for yourself. It's recognizing that this isn't personal. This is just life. Sometimes shit happens. And it's recognizing also that nothing is permanent. Now, this means that nothing good is permanent, but it also means that everything painful too passes. So do any painful emotions. And if you can just be with yourself throughout them, as opposed to fighting against them, they tend to pass a little bit better, and you tend to find equanimity even in the darkest of moments. If you would like to work with me, get in touch with me on my website. It's fundamentals.ie.